In Hollywood science fiction films, some of the most exciting sequences involve going into or out of the airlock. And this really isn't all that surprising. I mean, the airlock is a pretty amazing concept. It's the door to space. One of the most crucial mechanical components of any spacecraft or space station. That thing which separates the relative safety of being inside from the perilous vacuum of space. So this has been something that's been nagging away at me for quite a few weeks now. One of my more recent little obsessions, if you will. Because it's prompted me to start to wonder if in any of the footage of the so-called real spacewalks, or EVAs, extravehicular activities, in any of the space programs, because I've been wondering if I could actually find a singular piece of footage which undeniably shows the astronaut going from inside the craft or space station, being in the artificial atmosphere with inside the cabin, to putting on his spacesuit and having the airlock open and then floating out to the exterior. You would think that this would be a simple enough piece of footage to find. After all, 2015 marked the 50th anniversary of the first EVAs in history. That's 50 years of spacewalks now. And you'd think that there should be copious amounts of footage from handheld cameras or other cameras showing uncut, unedited, continuous shots of any astronaut going from within the cabin outside into space. So this is what I've been looking for, scouring as much footage from the early Gemini and Russian EVA missions to Apollo to the space shuttle and then on to the Mir and International Space Station missions. And sure enough, I can't say that as of yet I found anything which represents this kind of unedited, continuous shot. We can find lots of footage taken from outside, showing the astronauts supposedly exiting the hatch. And we can find footage of the astronauts prepping and putting on their suits in what is clearly an air-filled environment. But the question of trying to find something which shows them undeniably going from the interior pressurized cabin out into the vacuum of space, for the life of me, I cannot find this. And again, when we consider how many Hollywood movies incorporate scenes involving the airlock, because of just how much danger is involved, and not to mention how much just personal excitement would be experienced on the part of the astronaut getting their first look at space from outside the vehicle. It's really hard to comprehend that no one ever considered capturing such a piece of footage. If I were to come across footage that seemed to undeniably show this, it'd be really hard to explain it away. It would be a really difficult thing to fake. And that's the whole point. Because if you are familiar with all the kinds of critical observation that has been done on things like the ISS or so many of these other space missions involving space bubbles and harnesses and all these very peculiar anomalies, it makes a lot of sense. Because obviously the ways that they are having to try and fake the interior shots of the ISS or any other spacecraft or space station with simulated zero gravity would be quite different from the ways that they fake the outside shots using blackout pools and things like this. So going seamlessly from an interior shot in an air-filled cabin to a pool filled with water obviously would pose a whole host of problems. So one thing I found that was very interesting was this sequence showing an episode which I believe occurred on the Russian Mir space station. And apparently this was a very harrowing ordeal because there was a malfunction with the airlock. And the astronauts came back in from an EVA and were unable to secure the door all the way and repressurize the cabin. So they were starting to run out of air, and it was a bit of a panic mode trying to get that figured out. And then eventually they came inside a further interior door and were able to lock it down. But the funny thing is that this whole sequence is basically just a dramatic reenactment. We don't actually see the real footage of this event, and you can tell pretty easily that it's a reenactment because of all the camera shots that are focusing directly in on their helmets, and even in the reenactment they're showing that the people inside the space station and people down at mission control have cameras inside the airlock who can see, who are watching what the astronauts are doing. So you would think that the real live footage would be perfectly available from all kinds of angles and would make for a much more realistic portrayal of this event. So the question is, why would they reenact the whole thing if instead of just showing the real footage? So by itself, I suppose this whole question might not be a definitive proof all by itself that they are indeed faking these spacewalks and space stations and everything, but I find it to be another very interesting example of these kinds of proofs by way of omission. Just like we never see astronauts pulling 360s out in space with a handheld camera, or the same thing on the moon. They never do a 360 and do a panoramic shot. But the question is why? I mean, in this day and age now where they have GoPro cameras that can be hooked onto the astronaut's forehead or on the outside of the suit, and we actually have lots of examples of this. And I found one where the GoPro is on the astronaut while he's being prepped and having his suit put on, and then once again we see the GoPro camera recording the EVA for over an hour worth of spacewalk when he's outside the space station. But for whatever reason they failed to include those very intense moments when the airlock is first depressurized and the doors opened and they're floating through. I mean, wouldn't a POV shot like that be great stuff for showing the excitement of space exploration and being an astronaut? Wouldn't you want to record the reaction of an astronaut's first experience of seeing the stars just through the visor of his space helmet and floating out into the vastness of space, only tethered to the space station by a tiny strap or whatever? It's the more you think about it, it's really hard to imagine we should have tons of examples of this, and yet it's always cut away. It's always interior and then cut to exterior. So why nothing continuous? I mean, if this is such a routine thing now, then I should be able to see them going in and out all the time.